Welcome to my class on Gayatri Spivak's landmark essay Can the Subaltern Speak? Gayatri Spivak is a well-known name in the field of feminist studies, deconstructionism, post-colonialism and Marxism. Born in Calcutta in West Bengal, she is currently professor at the Columbia University. She's been married twice, first in 1964 to Talbot Spivak, who was a fellow student at the University of Calcutta, and later to Basudev Chatterjee, a professor of history at the Delhi University. Spivak's writings have the reputation of being rather dense and difficult to understand. Can the Subaltern Speak is no exception. In a series of sessions, I shall be attempting to explain in simple terms the key ideas expressed in the essay so that you will be able to read and analyze the text better.
A post-colonial theorist, Gayatri Spivak rose to prominence through her translation of Derrida's Of Grammatology. She is regarded as one of the pillars of the post-colonial trilogy, the other two being Edward Said and Homi Bhabha. She has made significant contributions to contemporary cultural studies and critical theories and is also known for her theories about colonial oppression. She has challenged key ideas in Marxism and post-Marxism, post-structuralism and feminism. Her writings focus on deconstruction from a feminist perspective. They cover a large area and include a critique of imperialism and colonial discourse. There is also an engagement with the Marxist critique of capital and the international division of labor and a critique of race in relation to nationality, ethnicity and immigrant groups. The essay Can the Subaltern Speak was first published in the journal Wedge in the year 1985. It was reprinted in the collection Marxism and the Interpretation of Culture in 1988. In this essay, Spivak makes a detailed analysis of the conversation between the post-structuralist philosophers Michel Foucault and Gilles Deluse. In the essay Can the Subaltern Speak, Gayatri Spivak critically analyzes the conversation between the post-structuralists Michel Foucault and Gilles Deluse, which took place in the year 1972. The transcript of this conversation appeared in Michel Foucault's Language Counter-Memory Practice, Selected Essays and Interviews, edited by Donald F. Bouchard and published in 1977. The essay Can the Subaltern Speak actually gives Gayatri Spivak's take on the responsibilities and the task of the post-colonial intellectual. She is actually trying to problematize the function of the post-colonial intellectual. To achieve her purpose, she connects the radical claim of the 20th century French intellectuals Michel Foucault and Gilles Deluse to speak for the disenfranchised and the self-righteous claims of British colonialism to rescue native women from Hindu widow sacrifice. She critically shows the limits, especially of the French post-structuralist theories, particularly those of Michel Foucault, his conception of power, Gilles Deluse, Jacques Lacan and Félix Guattari. Gayatri Spivak uses the tool of deconstruction to critically reread the phenomena of society and emphasizes its ethical importance. Gayatri Spivak starts with a critique of Foucault and Deleuze, through which she warns against the threats of reinscribing imperial premises of colonial studies. According to her, both Foucault and Deleuze failed to provide and consider a suitable concept of ideology. She accuses them of aligning themselves with bourgeois sociologists. Gayatri Spivak's criticisms of both Deleuze and Foucault are twofold. Firstly, she says that Deleuze is trapped in his unconscious Euro-centrism by referring to the localized workers' struggles as the main principle in his political theory. He forgets about the international division of labor. That is, Foucault and Deleuze favor micrological structures of resistance which are basically determined by local conflicts. Spivak rejects this post-structuralist micrological determinations. She argues that the micrological forms of resistance or the local resistance or the local struggles must not be used to eliminate the larger macrological configurations of power. Gayatri Spivak is probably one of the earliest to apply post-colonial theory through a deconstructive lens. Her strategy involves dismantling the tradition of Western thought, because according to Spivak, it is this Eurocentric tradition that has provided the justification for European colonialism and neocolonialism. She also argued that the development of Western philosophy has a lot to do with the history of European imperial expansion from 19th century British imperialism to 20th century American foreign policy making. In the conversation, the French intellectuals Michel Foucault and Gilles Deluse are discussing 2 points. First, the connection between the struggles of women, homosexuals, prisoners, etc. to class struggle. Secondly, the theorists also examine the relationship between theory, practice and power. In the coming slides, I'll be giving you an outline of the conversation between Foucault and Deleuze so that you will get a better understanding of what Spivak is trying to establish in her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? The conversation begins with Deleuze discussing the new relationship between theory and practice. Earlier, practice was thought of as an application of theory, but it has an opposite sense too. Practice inspires theory. Deleuze elaborates his point by talking about the information group for prisons Foucault organized in order to create conditions that permitted the prisoners themselves to speak. According to Deleuze, confined individuals need to speak for themselves. In short, the purpose of Foucault's information group for prisons was to create conditions for prisoners to speak. This is important because a theorizing intellectual is no longer a subject, a representing or representative consciousness. The truth is that those who act and struggle are not represented by any group or union. The group or union is actually forcefully grabbing the right to represent the conscience of those who act and struggle. In reply to that, Foucault says that the intellectual involves politically because of 2 different aspects of his activity. Number 1, his position as an intellectual in a bourgeois society in the system of capitalist production. Number 2, his proper discourse that disclosed political relationships. The intellectual spoke the truth to those who had not yet seen it. He speaks the truth for those who were forbidden from speaking the truth. He was conscience, he was consciousness, he was eloquence. But the intellectual soon discovered that the masses no longer needed him to gain knowledge, because they know way better than the intellectual and are very well capable of expressing themselves. But this does not happen, as there is a system of power which blocks, prohibits and invalidates this discourse, and it is done by none other than the intellectuals who are themselves the agents of this system of power. Hence, Foucault says that the intellectual's role is to fight against the forms of power that make him an instrument of their dominance, to undermine power where it is most invisible and deceptive. Deluse further elaborates on the relationship between theory and practice. He says that a theory is like a box of tools. Somebody has to use it. If no one uses it, then the theory becomes worthless. To prove his point, Deluse talks about reforms. He says that the very notion of reform is stupid. And these are the reasons why he considers the notion of reform as worthless or stupid. Firstly, reforms are designed by people who claim to be representative but are not in the strict sense of the term. Secondly, when reforms are made based on the complaints and demands of those concerned, then it is not reform but revolutionary action, an act that questions the totality of power and the hierarchy that maintains it. This is what happens in prisons. Foucault also agrees that when prisoners get a chance to speak up, then it becomes a discourse against power, and it is the form of discourse which actually matters. It is the counter discourse of prisoners and not a theory about delinquency. Foucault is of the opinion that people do not trust or rather hate the judicial system because they believe that power is always exercised at the expense of the people. Deluse also agrees that power develops a global vision. All the current forms of repression, the racist repression of immigrant workers, the repression in factories, in the educational system, and the general repression of youth, they are all totalized or subsumed or thought of as the same from the point of view of power. We may know who is exploiting whom or who receives the profits, but when it comes to actual power, nobody knows who is wielding it exactly. Strangely, it is not in the hands of those who rule or govern. Foucault says that the problem is nobody can comprehend the nature of power. The question of power is a total enigma. Nobody knows who exercises power and in what sphere. Each struggle develops around a particular source of power, even the tiny countless sources. It might be a very insignificant source like a manager or a boss or a warden. The first step towards reversing the power source is to talk about it. Now that will initiate new struggles against the existing forms of power. Deluse also emphasizes the same point when he says that it is clear who exploits, who profits, and who governs. But power is something more diffuse or spread out loosely. Marxism has tried to define the problem essentially in terms of interests. But interest is not the final answer. Even people whose interests are not being served can strictly support the existing power structure. There are investments of desire that act contrary to our interests, and interest always follows and settles where desire has placed it. Foucault also believed that power is exercised the way it is in order to maintain capitalist exploitation. The generality of the struggle specifically derives from the system of power. The conversation comes to a close with Deluse's assertion that every revolutionary attack therefore is linked to the workers' struggle.
I believe you've been able to gather some idea about the context in which the essay was written and what Spivak sets out to establish in her essay. This is just an introduction. I shall be uploading more videos on this, which I hope will guide you to a better understanding of the text. Thank you.